When we talk about money obeying heaven's system, we must first return to the foundation, recognizing who truly owns it all. You see, we often speak about my money, my business, my investments, but in heaven's language there is no asterisk my asterisk, only asterisk his asterisk. The silver is his, the gold is his, the breath that allows you to work, the mind that creates ideas, the favor that opens doors, every single part of it comes from him. When this revelation enters your spirit, it changes everything. You stop trying to be the owner and you become the steward. Ownership carries stress. Stewardship carries peace. Ownership demands results. Stewardship releases trust. When you operate as a steward under divine ownership, the weight shifts from your shoulders to heaven's hands. Many believers pray for financial breakthroughs, yet they live as if they are the source of their own provision. That's why worry becomes their shadow. They worry when the paycheck delays, they panic when clients withdraw, they lose sleep when numbers don't add up. But when you truly understand that you are not the owner, worry loses its power because the owner never runs out. The owner never defaults. The owner never fails. You are simply managing what already belongs to him, and if the resources come from heaven, then heaven will sustain them. Think of the way a manager operates in a company. He doesn't worry about the supply chain. He follows the instructions of the owner. When you recognize that God is the true source, your decisions shift from survival to obedience. You stop asking, "How can I make more?" and start asking, "How can I manage better what heaven has entrusted to me?" That's when divine wisdom begins to flow. Suddenly, ideas are no longer random, they are revelations. Business opportunities aren't coincidences, they are assignments. Money stops being a master and becomes a servant, moving at the rhythm of your faith. This is why many people, even with large incomes, still live in lack, because they manage like owners, not stewards. They spend without asking, invest without discerning, and give without purpose. Heaven cannot pour unlimited wealth into a vessel that doesn't understand divine order. God will not finance your independence. He will finance his intention through you. The moment you see yourself as a steward of heaven's property, the pressure to perform leaves and peace takes its place. You begin to say, "Lord, this is not my account, it's yours. These are not my profits, they are yours. Show me what to do with what belongs to you." And in that posture, heaven begins to respond. When you live under that awareness, generosity becomes natural, not forced, because you no longer see giving as losing, you see it as transferring resources within the same kingdom. How can a steward lose when everything he manages belongs to the same owner? You see, the mindset of ownership breeds scarcity, but the mindset of stewardship unlocks overflow. When you know the source cannot run dry, your hands cannot stay closed. You live freely, give freely, and receive freely. The world teaches that financial security comes from accumulation, but heaven teaches that it comes from alignment. When you know who owns the wealth, you stop chasing it and start flowing with it. Money begins to recognize your authority because you are now operating under divine jurisdiction. You speak and doors open not because of who you are, but because of whose you are. When heaven's authority backs your faith, lack has no legal ground to remain. So today, I'm asking you not to pray for more money, but to shift your mindset. Don't just ask God to bless your bank account, ask Him to make you a faithful steward of His. Don't just manage your wallet, manage His will. When you live from that revelation, everything you touch carries divine purpose, and every resource begins to serve a higher assignment. That is when money truly begins to obey heaven's system, because it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the one who never runs out. Alignment is the key that unlocks the flow of heaven's financial system. You can have faith, you can pray, you can give, but if your spirit, thoughts, and actions are not aligned with divine order, the flow cannot move freely. God is not only a God of miracles, He is a God of principles, and principles always precede provision. You can't operate on earth's financial principles and expect heaven's results. Alignment is not about perfection, it's about positioning. When your heart, your words, and your ways align with God's purpose, heaven recognizes your authority and begins to move resources toward you. Many people say they trust God for financial breakthroughs, yet their decisions contradict their declarations. They pray for abundance but think in scarcity. They talk faith but act in fear. They tithe but then complain about lack. That's not alignment, that's conflict. Heaven responds to consistency. When your inner belief, your spoken word, and your external action all move in one direction, heaven has a clear channel to release blessing. Think of it like a power line. If one wire is disconnected, the current can't flow, but when everything connects properly, power moves instantly. Alignment begins with the heart. You cannot serve two masters, God and money. If money still controls your peace, you are out of alignment. When you get more and feel anxious, when you give and feel regret, that's not spiritual flow. That's emotional attachment. God wants your heart in a place where money is not your comfort, but your tool. The moment you detach your heart from money, heaven begins to trust you with more. Because God will only increase what He can trust to remain in His control. Then comes the alignment of thought. The mind is the battlefield where most financial blessings are won or lost. If you think small, you attract small. If you think fear, you manifest lack. The Bible says, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." Your financial reality will always mirror your spiritual mentality. That's why renewing your mind is not optional, it's essential. You must train your thoughts to reflect heaven's abundance, not earth's limitation. The moment your thinking elevates to kingdom level, your results begin to follow. But even when your heart and mind are aligned, your actions must also follow. You cannot declare that you trust God and still make decisions driven by panic. You cannot claim to live under heaven's system and still manipulate, cheat, or withhold. Alignment demands integrity. Heaven only flows where purity and obedience are present. You don't have to be perfect, but you must be positioned. Every obedient step you take, even if small, becomes a signal to heaven that says, "This vessel is ready." When your actions match your faith, heaven's favor accelerates. Suddenly, what used to be delayed begins to move quickly. Divine connections form, opportunities open, and resources flow. Not because you chased them, but because you aligned with their source. Alignment removes resistance. It turns prayer from pleading into commanding. It transforms giving from obligation into revelation. It shifts your energy from trying to make things happen to simply walking in what has already been ordained. If your life feels like constant struggle, it's not because heaven is ignoring you. It's often because something is misaligned. You may have the right desire but the wrong focus. You may be sowing but still speaking doubt. You may be praying but acting outside of faith. Realignment doesn't require you to start over. It requires you to return to the center God's will. When your financial life aligns with His purpose, lack has no authority because heaven supports what heaven designs. You were never meant to chase blessings. Blessings were meant to follow alignment. The moment your heart, mind, and actions harmonize with heaven's rhythm, the flow begins effortlessly. Money starts to move in the direction of your obedience because heaven trusts what walks in order. That is when divine supply overtakes human effort, when heaven's financial system recognizes that your life is finally in sync with its design. Faith is heaven's currency. It is not something you hold in your hand. It is something you hold in your heart. The world operates on money, but heaven operates on faith. You can't buy a miracle, you can't negotiate with God, and you can't manipulate blessings. You access them by believing. Every promise written in the Word is available to you, but it only manifests when faith makes the transaction. Faith is not a wish, it's a legal exchange between heaven and earth. When you speak in faith, you are authorizing heaven to move on your behalf. The reason many people don't see the fullness of their financial blessing is because they still approach God as beggars instead of believers. They plead for provision when they've already been given authority to declare it. Heaven doesn't respond to desperation, it responds to faith. Desperation makes noise, but faith makes movement. You can cry and still stay empty. You can shout and still see no result. But when your spirit speaks in faith, all of heaven takes attention because faith sounds like God. Faith carries the same creative vibration that said, "Let there be light." When that sound comes from your mouth, creation obeys again. Faith is not about ignoring reality, it's about rewriting it. You may see lack, but faith says, "I shall not want." You may see bills, but faith says, "My God shall supply all my needs." You may see impossibility, but faith says, "With God, all things are possible." That's why you must guard your mouth. Every word you speak is a seed, and faith-filled words carry creative power. If you speak fear, you authorize failure. If you speak faith, you authorize favor. What you declare consistently will shape what you experience physically. Heaven listens to words that agree with its laws. Many people wait to feel faith before they speak, but faith doesn't follow feelings, feelings follow faith. You speak it first, you act like it's already done. You sow as if harvest is guaranteed. That's when the spiritual system begins to respond. You can't wait for evidence to believe. You must believe to see evidence. The woman with the issue of blood didn't wait for a sign, she moved in faith, and the moment she touched Jesus, healing flowed. The faith came first, the manifestation followed. In the realm of finances, faith works the same way. You might not see how the breakthrough will happen, but you continue to act like it's already yours. You continue to tithe when it looks impossible. You continue to speak abundance when your account looks dry. Because faith doesn't consult circumstances, it consults heaven's truth. Faith declares the end while standing in the middle. It sees the provision beyond the problem. The more you practice faith, the more heaven trusts your words. And when heaven trusts your words, what you say begins to manifest with speed. Faith is the key that opens doors that effort cannot. You can work hard all your life, but without faith, your labor remains limited. When faith enters your finances, your work multiplies beyond human logic. Suddenly, the small business becomes fruitful. The closed doors begin to open. The unexpected favor appears. Not because you pushed harder, but because you believed deeper. Faith invites God into your equation, and when God steps in, the impossible steps out. So, don't let fear be your language when faith is your inheritance. Even when you don't see the way, declare it anyway. Even when you feel weak, speak strength. Heaven is waiting for your sound. The moment faith leaves your lips, the miracle begins its journey. Speak like one who knows that heaven's economy is already working for you. Live as one who believes that what God promised, He will perform. And when your faith becomes the language of your life, money, opportunities, and favor will begin to obey heaven's order through your words. Giving is one of the most misunderstood keys in heaven's financial system. Many see it as a transaction, but in heaven, giving is transformation. It is not about losing what you have, it's about unlocking what you've been promised. Every seed carries a spiritual code that speaks to your future. When you give in obedience, you are not just releasing money, you are releasing faith, and heaven always responds to faith. The act of giving is the act of trusting God's economy above man's. When you release what's in your hand, heaven releases what's in its storehouse. But understand this, not all giving carries power. There is a difference between emotional giving and prophetic giving. Emotional giving happens when you respond out of impulse or guilt. Prophetic giving happens when you respond to a divine instruction. The seed that moves heaven is the one heaven asked for. Abraham didn't just give Isaac because he wanted to. He gave because God commanded it. And when he obeyed, heaven responded with a generational blessing. True giving is never random. It is always revelation. That is why the most powerful seeds are the ones born from obedience, not convenience. Many people wonder why they give and see no return. It's not because God failed, it's because they gave without instruction. You can't plant corn and expect mangoes. You must sow in the right soil. The right soil is not just a place, it's a moment of obedience. When heaven whispers, sow here, it's because there's a harvest already prepared there. When you sow where God leads, your seed becomes prophetic. It begins to speak to the future you cannot see yet. And when heaven hears that voice, it starts orchestrating resources, connections, and favor to meet you at your point of faith. You see, the seed is not measured by amount, but by obedience. The widow who gave her last 2 coins gave more than all the wealthy men because her seed carried total trust. God is not moved by how much you give, but by how much of you is in what you give. The moment giving stops being about money and starts being about surrender, the supernatural begins to move. That's why the blessing of giving is not always immediate, it's eternal. Sometimes the harvest comes in money, sometimes in protection, sometimes in divine timing, sometimes in opportunities you didn't even pray for. Heaven never forgets a seed sown in obedience. When you become a prophetic giver, giving no longer feels like sacrifice. It becomes a secret weapon. You realize that every time you release something in faith, you are creating spiritual motion. Your seed goes ahead of you into places your feet haven't reached yet. It prepares rooms, opens doors, and breaks barriers. Giving is the language of faith, and it's the sound heaven cannot ignore. When you give, you are echoing God's nature because He too gave His best, His Son. That's why every act of giving brings you closer to His likeness and positions you for His favor. You must never give to impress heaven. You give to align with heaven. You give not to buy blessings, but to demonstrate trust. When you let go of what you think you need to survive, you declare that heaven is your source, not your paycheck. And the moment heaven sees that confidence, the flow begins. What leaves your hand never leaves your life. It simply changes location. It leaves your possession and enters God's multiplication system. So never underestimate the power of a seed. One act of prophetic giving can shift your financial atmosphere for years to come. When you sow in obedience, your seed becomes your intercessor. It speaks when you cannot, and it works where you cannot. And when the appointed time comes, heaven always answers the voice of your obedience with abundance. Words are not empty sounds, they are spiritual commands. Every time you speak, you are either building or breaking, inviting or resisting, releasing life or releasing limitation. In heaven's financial system, words are not casual, they are currency. What you speak becomes what you live. The universe is wired to respond to sound, and heaven moves when it recognizes faith in your voice. God himself demonstrated this when he spoke the world into existence. He didn't think light into being. He spoke it. If creation was birthed through words, then your financial world is shaped the same way. Many people pray for prosperity, but cancel their own answers with the words they speak afterward. They declare, "I'm believing for increase," and then say, "Money is always tight for me." They pray for opportunities, then confess, "Nothing ever works out." They tithe and sow, but then speak fear into their own harvest. Heaven cannot multiply what your mouth keeps cursing. Your words set the atmosphere of your finances. When your confession agrees with heaven, resources align. When it contradicts, they withdraw. You cannot expect divine abundance while speaking earthly defeat. This is why your mouth must be trained to talk like your Father. God never speaks in uncertainty. He never says maybe. He never says I'm not sure. His word is power because it carries faith. When your words carry faith, they begin to function with authority. It's not about shouting louder. It's about believing deeper. You don't have to convince heaven with your volume. You move heaven with your conviction. The moment your words come from a heart of faith, creation listens. Money listens. Circumstances listen. Even resistance listens. Because everything created is still responding to the same divine frequency that began in Genesis *, let there be. Your speech must become prophetic. Don't describe what you see. Declare what God says. Don't repeat the problem. Release the promise. The atmosphere of your life follows the vocabulary of your faith. When you speak consistently in alignment with divine truth, you begin to notice something shift not just around you, but inside you. Fear begins to fade. Worry loses strength. Doubt starts to weaken. And soon, your outer world begins to reflect your inner confidence. That's why Jesus said, "You shall have whatever you say." Not whatever you think or whatever you wish, but whatever you say. The challenge for many is that they speak from emotion instead of revelation. Words born from fear are unstable. Words born from frustration have no authority, but words born from faith are unshakable. When your heart and your mouth agree in faith, your declarations become creative commands. You can speak to debt and call it cancelled. You can speak to doors and command them to open. You can speak to opportunities and call them forth. You are not begging, you are legislating. You are not hoping, you are authorizing. Heaven backs words that mirror its laws. The spiritual principle is simple. Your tongue determines your territory. If you speak lack, you live within its limits. If you speak abundance, you step into its dimension. You might be surrounded by bills, but if your words remain anchored in faith, your situation will eventually align. Because your speech is a seed, and seeds, when consistent, must bear fruit. The harvest of your life will always resemble the language of your lips. So begin to speak like one who knows money is a servant of heaven, not a master on earth. Speak health into your business. Speak increase into your work. Speak clarity over your ideas. Stop agreeing with shortage and start agreeing with supply. You don't need to wait for proof to speak. Your words create the proof. The more you align your confession with God's truth, the more your finances align with heaven's order. Because when faith becomes your language, even money begins to recognize your voice. The highest level in heaven's financial system is when you stop living as a collector and start living as a distributor. When you understand that everything God places in your hand has a purpose beyond your own comfort, you step into a divine flow that never runs dry. The world teaches people to gather and guard, but heaven teaches to receive and release. You were not created to be a reservoir. You were created to be a river. A reservoir stores until it becomes stagnant, but a river keeps moving and stays alive. When God sees that you are a vessel that allows blessings to flow through you, He keeps pouring more because He knows what comes in will never stay stuck. The true proof that money no longer controls you is found in how freely you can release it for a higher purpose. When you see yourself as a kingdom distributor, your mindset shifts from fear to faith. You stop asking, "Do I have enough?" and start asking, "What does heaven want me to do with what I have?" That's the language of divine trust. God cannot bless what you won't let go of. Many people block their own flow because they hold too tightly. They ask God for abundance but refuse to become a channel for it. The moment you make giving and serving your lifestyle, God increases your capacity. He expands your reach because He knows your hands will not close when He gives more. It's a divine principle. What flows through you grows around you. When you make yourself available to meet needs, God makes sure your needs are always met. Look at the life of the widow who fed the prophet Elijah. She gave her last portion, not knowing what would happen next, but heaven multiplied her oil until the famine ended. Her house became the supply station for her entire season. That is what happens when you live with the distributor's mindset. What you give out never leaves you empty. It creates an overflow that cannot be stopped. The reason so many people never experience the fullness of abundance is because they think blessing ends with possession. They measure success by what they can hold, not by what they can release. But the kingdom doesn't measure wealth by how much you gather. It measures it by how much you can give without fear. The more your heart opens, the more heaven trusts you. When you become a distributor of heaven's resources, whether through generosity, compassion, or service, God ensures your supply never ends, because your life has become an extension of His nature. Money, in its purest form, is a tool for transformation. It is never meant to sit idle. Every blessing carries an assignment. Every resource carries a responsibility. When you understand that, you stop chasing after things and start channeling purpose through them. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to make ends meet, and you start seeing yourself as heaven's representative on earth, managing the flow of blessing for others. That's when your finances become an instrument for miracles. God begins to connect you with people, places, and projects that need what you carry. You become the answer to prayers others have been whispering in secret. When you live as a kingdom distributor, money finds you because it recognizes its purpose in your hands. You don't have to beg for it or manipulate it. It comes willingly because you've proven you know what to do with it. Your life becomes a channel where heaven's abundance flows freely, touching lives, meeting needs, and expanding the reach of God's goodness. That's the posture heaven is looking for, not accumulation, but circulation, not fear, but faith, not ownership, but partnership. And when that becomes your reality, lack loses its grip, worry loses its voice, and abundance becomes your natural state. Because when you live to give, heaven lives to provide.